Hey, what's up, y'all? This is William, the Permaculture Consultant. Now, we've been getting about 4 or 5 days of rain out here in East Texas. So, I figured it'd be a good time to show you guys some permaculture solutions for heavy rain. Now, before I show you some of the permaculture solutions, I'm first going to show you what the typical standard solution for water is, and it's right here. The city usually puts ditches along the side of the roadway and funnels the water and sends it on downstream. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I would say it's not the solution, or shouldn't be the solution in most cases. Instead, let me show you some alternatives that I think more of us, especially, public land and stuff like that, should go with. The first example I would show you are these swales. Now, the cool thing about these swales is that they do all of this passively. Once you dig it, I should first explain what a swale is. A swale is a perfectly level ditch on contour, meaning the point of this swale right here is the exact same elevation as this point of the swale and that point of the swale over there. It's all the exact same elevation. Everything you excavate from the ditch immediately goes on the downhill side, and that's where you plant your trees, like you see here. Now, this is a water harvesting, nutrient collecting, tree growing system. So as the rain hits your property, if there's enough to create runoff, which I forget what the calculation is, but if there's enough to create runoff, then it'll run into the swale, fill up the swale, and then it will hit the overflow. Now, you can choose anywhere along the swale you want the overflow, but try to direct it in the spot that makes the most sense. In this case, it leads into another swale. So once this swale is full, it overflows and hits this swale right here. And once this swale is full, it overflows and hits this swale over here. These are just down in elevation on the landscape. Now, when you're making your swales, you want to make sure they're not so close so where this one doesn't have any space in between for runoff to collect into the swale. You don't want to make it dependent upon its previous swale, if that makes sense. You also want enough space in between to probably graze animals, or at least walk or run equipment or something like that, because these swales do limit your access. Once you dig a swale, you're not supposed to be walking or driving or running your animals over the top of the mound, because that creates compaction, and that's not what you're going for with the swale. You want the water to collect in the ditch of the swale and then soak into the soil. It's going to create like a little miniature aquifer on the downhill side of the swale, and over the course of 7 years, I think it maximizes it collects as much as it's ever going to collect. And then you have the possibility of springs popping up downhill. Jeff Lawton, I think he has like 2 or 3 new springs on his farm in Australia, just because he has large scale swales high in the landscape. That's another thing I should point out. You want these to be as high in the landscape as possible, because it's going to benefit everything downhill from there. This right here is probably, that first swale I showed you up there is probably the highest point, is definitely the highest point on the landscape, and everything slopes downhill as you go towards the back of the property. You can also use swales in scenarios like this where there's just standing water. This stuff isn't soaking in at all. If I were to dig a swale right here, which I can't because there's obviously buildings and stuff in the way, but if I were to dig a swale right here, it would give a place for the water to go to the lowest point, which would be the bottom ditch of a swale. You also want to make sure that your swales are big enough to handle the collection of the water. Let me put it to you this way. If you live in a rainforest where it rains, we have like heavy monsoon seasons, stuff like that, you might not necessarily need super large, wide swales. And the reason for that is because you have like more frequent rains, you know what I mean? If you're in an arid environment that's super flat, or just an arid environment in general, you want massive swales. The reason for that is that you don't want any of that water to go to waste. You don't want any of it hitting your overflow. You want it all to stay in the soil, because that's the most efficient form of storage for water. Like this swale over here. This one is by far bigger. It's actually twice as big as the first swales I showed you over there. And this is a preferable size for this part of Texas. This is 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep. It also gives you plenty of berm, as you see right here, to plant on. The 3 foot wide, 1 foot deep swales, they don't really give you too much berm, and they really don't hold on to too much water. The 6x2, those are the sweet spot around here. On a larger scale, I might even make the swales larger. I wouldn't go any deeper than 2 feet, but I might make them larger. Now, let me give you a scenario where you're dealing with a bunch of runoff that isn't your fault. It's directed towards your property from a neighbor's property. How do you slow that down? Like during heavy rain events, let's say it's just coming rushing in and it's causing erosion and all that type of stuff. Well, in our case, right here, I'm walking on the dam wall right now, and you can see the bamboo holding it all together. That pasture over there, you can see the fence line. All that pasture feeds or runs water, pushes water onto this property. That is hundreds of acres. So hundreds of acres of water is being funneled onto a property of 5 acres. How does this property handle that? Well, it handles it with this pond right over here. This pond captures all that water that comes flying from that pasture, from that field, because they don't have anything arresting the water, comes flying through. You can see the green, that's the riparian filter thing we're working on. Comes flying through, hits that, funnels in to this pond where I'm storing it, and can also use it for growing trees and all that stuff. On this side, this is the north side of the pond, I can put peach trees here, and that'll protect them from late spring frost. It's a microclimate because the water is going to be warmer than, let's say it randomly freezes overnight. One of these, like, okay, this part of Texas, it's very, very common to have a random late spring frost, usually before Easter happens. If I have peaches right here, this will protect, the pond will protect the blooms on the peaches because this water is warmer than whatever the freeze is going to be. It creates what's called a microclimate for you. Same thing up in the swales. There have been times where there was a late spring frost in the swales, but the trees were fine, like the blueberry plants and all that stuff were fine. Comfrey, I think I did a video on Permaculture's farm, the very, very beginning, talking about the microclimates in the swales. The comfrey had 0 frost damage because of the high specific temperature of the water that was in the ditch part of the swale. So I just showed you the pond. I showed you some of the swales on this property. Real quick, I'm going to show you some of the swales on my father-in-law's property. They're considerably newer than any of these guys, and show you guys how they're doing. So this one is my father-in-law's swale, and as you can see, it's pretty filled with water. The spillway is down on that side. I have yellow hands because I was wearing those deerskin gloves, and they usually leak dye the first couple times you use them. But there's the food forest over here on this side, flows down into the swale. You can see little Chloe over there. She's actually on the mound of the swale. That might help give you a sense of what the swale looks like. This is the ditch side. I mean, this is the mound side, the ditch, food forest on the uphill side. And then the trees in this case are planted on top of the mound. If you're in a very arid environment, then you'd probably plant them down in the ditch. This is not an arid environment. And then downhill of this swale is actually another swale with enough space between them to graze animals. This one is a little overgrown, so it might be a little harder to see. These little bundles are the ragweed, or big bundles are the ragweed that came out of these swales. But here you can see the other one. And this one I believe, okay, here's why soil tests are useless. This, I believe, is mostly clay. That swale right there is mostly sand. And they're just, I think, like 16, 20 feet apart from each other. That one drains water a lot faster than this one does. But over time, as the soil builds, as the microbes become, you know, super active, that's all going to change, and they're both going to drain very, very well. So I've shown you swales, I've shown you a couple ponds. Now, the most efficient form of water harvesting on your property is going to be just the soil. Just building the soil. For every 1% of organic matter that you increase in the soil, that's another 20,000 gallons per acre that it's able to hold on to and store. That's going to be your most efficient way. Now you might be asking, how do I increase the organic material on my property, or the organic matter in my soil on my property? The fastest way to do that, and a lot of the purple breathers aren't going to like this, but the fastest way to do that is correctly grazing your animals, like these guys over here. Now you can see a cow there's a bull way out in the distance. But if these guys were correctly grazed on this pasture, it would knock out a ton of the rainfall, or a ton of the runoff that hits this property. It would be stored in this pasture, and it would make this pasture very, very drought resistant. All you have to do is just graze correctly. Look at what Greg Judy's doing. From what I've heard, it's like walking on clouds walking on his pastures, because he has so much organic material in his soil that he's just able to hold on to water. And the more drought resistant, the more drought tolerant your property becomes, the more resilient you become, and then the more resilient your animals become. Whenever I was at Jeff Lawton's in I can't remember, 2019 maybe. Whenever I was out there, Australia was going through a 100-year drought event, to the point where his organization Muslim Aid was buying a ton of hay and providing it for a bunch of Australian cattle farmers. Now, his farm, Zaytuna Farm, had zero issues at all. The only thing that changed was that we had to start bathing in the ponds instead of taking showers, and that was it. Everybody stank already anyway, so it was all right. But yeah, his pastures were completely unaffected. His pastures were still green. In fact, the next door neighbors, they were all running cows. And little side note, absolutely zero of Jeff Lawton's neighbors were picking up, they were all farmers, but none of them were picking up any of the practices that Jeff Lawton was doing on his farm. His pasture stayed lush and green, and everybody else's cows were mooing at the property because they could see the green grass on that side, but couldn't get access to it. And meanwhile, they had to deal with 2-inch brown grass and were fed hay. They were not happy about it. A ton of cows in Australia die to lack of water, believe it or not. All that to say this, water harvesting should be, I would say, now the permaculture design manual says number 1 on the property. I would say it should be number 2 on your property as far as list of priorities on your property. Number 1 being access. And I know that, you know, creating your water and stuff like that can create your access, like the dam that I showed you down there. By building that pond, we created access to the other side of the property. But none of that, I can't even build a pond if I don't get access to that point at least. I hope that makes sense. I hope this was helpful. If anybody needs any kind of consultations or any questions asked or answered, feel free to email me. All the links are down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Oh, right. Yeah. Before I forget, Kentucky Sustainable Living Festival. That's the 23rd and 24th. I will be teaching a class on soil biology, why like the soil tests don't matter, nitrogen, phosphorus, sodium, or potassium, not sodium. None of that really even matters either, and why you should be focusing on the soil biology, not really anything else. And I will also be teaching a permaculture homestead course. The 2 classes I'll be teaching there's going to be a ton of great speakers out there. Come join us at the Kentucky Sustainable Living event. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see ya.